When you wish upon a star.
Hello and welcome back to Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, where we're looking at the Walt Disney Animated Classics to see which ones are worthy of the title of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics. I'm Liam. As always, I'm joined by my friend Ben.
You are indeed. Last week we looked at the first Disney animated classic, Snow White. Liam, what are we looking at this week?
Today we're looking at Pinocchio, the second released feature from Disney. Ben, overall, what are your thoughts of Pinocchio?
So, I watched this a lot as a kid, which, on watching it again as an adult, I think explains a lot about my personality. There's one very specific phobia I definitely got as a consequence of this film. We'll come to it when it comes up in the plot. There's quite a lot to be scared of in this film. It's horrifying.
Not only is it horrifying, this is probably the most pious film that Disney ever made.
I think it's weird because, and maybe I'm generalising, but from what I understand, it was a point in history when literally everyone just smoked and drank all the time, and that was considered perfectly socially acceptable. But for some reason, it's considered not acceptable. So let's get into the plot then. So the film opens... Well, actually, the very first thing I noticed in this film is someone in the credits is called T.He, which made me laugh. I don't know if it was a deliberate joke or not, but it made me laugh. Then Jiminy Cricket sings When You Wish Upon a Star, which is one of the most iconic Disney songs. I don't think it's one of the best.
It's good. I think it deserves its place as kind of the theme of the company.
Yeah, it very much sets that idea of wishing. I think if you ever want to sound like Jiminy Cricket singing the song, because it's got that weird 1940s thing going on it, I think if you just do your American accent, unless you're American, but make it sound like you're about to cry, but don't want to cry. So it's like, when you wish upon a star. It works.
To be fair, Ben, when we're introduced to Jiminy Cricket, he is a travelling hobo. His life is not great.
So yeah, the film starts with him recounting this story, and he's obviously singing to the star. But one thing he says is, this is something that happened a long time ago, and I immediately thought, well, how old is Jiminy Cricket? How long do crickets live for?
Also, I only know he's a cricket because his name is Jiminy Cricket. To me, he's just a little green man.
I mean, Jiminy Little Green Man is just as good. I guess he whistles. Crickets whistle, right?
Do they?
No, they don't, do they? Crickets rub their legs together, right? That's how they make their noise.
And at no point in the film does Jiminy Cricket rub his legs together.
I would say I would like to have lived at the point in history, and I don't know the exact time frame for it, but when all homeless people wore busted top hats.
It's a strange bit of shorthand, that. I have no idea where it came from. It's probably like a, is it a Buster Keaton thing, maybe?
Maybe? But then I think he was more kind of a boater. I don't know. And Laurel and Hardy were the bowler hats. So I don't really know. Charlie Chaplin was a bowler hat as well. I don't know. I'm sure someone's written a very boring historical film treatise on it, but I don't care. So, we move on to him regaling us with the story of Pinocchio, and it starts with him as a top-hatted...
little green man.
Thank you. And he stumbles upon Geppetto's toy shop.
You say stumbles, he breaks in.
Yeah, for someone who's ostensibly someone's conscious, he's very handy at that sort of thing. Later he picks a lock, he's good at just getting into places, and when he's negotiating with the Blue Fairy later... She's just like, oh, okay, you can be a conscience. Here's a bunch of new clothes. He's like, oh, can I have some gold as well? Don't push your luck, mate. So, the first thing I noticed rewatching this, I was like, man, they did some incredible work drawing these backgrounds. I believe this is all hand-drawn. All the backgrounds are hand-drawn, which is astonishing. Particularly, there's one shot later on where Honest John, Gideon, and Pinocchio, they're walking down the winding street singing Hi Diddly Dee, and I guess you'd say the camera pans, obviously it's not really a camera. It pans along the shot. The artwork is absolutely beautiful.
This one was a huge step up from Snow White, in my opinion.
So Jiminy sees Geppetto putting the finishing touches to Pinocchio. And I've always thought the subtitle for Pinocchio should be like Pinocchio, Geppetto's miserable life. Because he's a very nice man. He doesn't do anything wrong in the film. He's just lovely to everyone. And a series of horrible things happen to him for no good reason. We talked in the last podcast about how being beautiful doesn't seem to equate with morality, or maybe it does. In this one, for a film that is incredibly pious, nothing bad happens to the bad characters, but lots of bad things happen to Geppetto.
Yeah, Geppetto deserves none of the terrible things that happen to him. He makes one wish and his life is objectively worse because of it.
So we'll skip forward slightly. So he wishes that Pinocchio was a real boy, which I don't think is a big ask. Like, he's an old man. He never found... I know that sounds silly, but he's just a very lonely old man. Like, presumably he never found love, or his wife died, or they never had children, or whatever it was, right? There's some tragic backstory there. And the Blue Fairy goes, yeah, I guess I could sort of do that, but I'm going to put a lot of restrictions on it for no good reason. Because the thing is, she puts all these on Pinocchio, and then Geppetto's the one who suffers. But he's not done anything wrong. He was just like, oh, can I have a boy? And she's like,
The thing I love about Geppetto's wish is it comes with conditions that are out of his control. And what's more, they're entirely down to the character of Pinocchio, who is created by the Blue Fairy. He doesn't have a personality. She could have created him being a very well-behaved boy.
And it's not like Geppetto does anything wrong. It's not like he's a bad influence on Pinocchio. He does literally everything right.
You say he doesn't do anything wrong. A man with that many clocks in his house is a nuisance.
I was thinking, God, his neighbours must be furious. Like, aside from the clocks, he's up at all hours. On the subject of the clocks, so I actually think the whole toy shop scene is really beautifully animated, like lots of creative ideas for like little toys, etc. I think it's a really good example of you can do something very beautiful with animation without necessarily having to go to scale. So it doesn't have to be a big dragon or whatever, it can still be something very precise and very well animated, which I think this film does really well. But there's a bit where all the cuckoo clocks and alarm clocks are going off and they're doing different things, and they all say 9 o'clock, and it cuts between them all, and it cuts back to him and he goes, what time is it?
I know.
And then he looks at his watch.
I'm assuming those clocks go off every hour as well, and it is deafening. I don't know how he manages to sleep through the night.
I guess it's just Stockholm Syndrome at that point. Jiminy does say that he's brought a lot of joy to people. The horrible, horrible people of the world of Pinocchio. I've also written, why does Geppetto hate Figaro so much? He's relentlessly addicted to Figaro for reasons I don't fully understand. So, the Blue Fairy comes down, turns Pinocchio into a boy. And I like how this film handles the weirdness that characters go, what? I can't believe that. I must be dreaming. But then they accept it and kind of move on. I think they get the tone of that right. It's not just, hey, there's some magic going on. You know, they do question it. And then Jiminy gets assigned to be Pinocchio's conscience after some hard bartering with the Blue Fairy. On the subject of the Blue Fairy, you probably know it was an actor on a soundstage and they traced over, which is why she looks
Rubbish.
like a normal person. Rubbish, yes. But it is a weird decision to make, to have someone look, I don't want to say photorealistic, that's very generous, but someone with normal proportions living in the world of Geppetto, whose eyes are half the size of his head.
I quite like it. I like that there is this contrast where it's clear that she is some separate magical creature within this world. I think that works really well. Speaking of magic, you say everyone is very accepting of it. Geppetto is incredibly freaked out at first, but yes, he does accept it, because he made a wish and he's like, oh, I guess it came true. The people at the school won't know that when he sends Pinocchio there the next day.
I was thinking this, like, in the best situation where you send a new kid to school with no explanation, the school are going to be like, the hell's going on here? Like, why haven't we heard about this child before? If the child's a puppet... But that leads me on to the next thing, which is there's a lot of nightmarish people in this film. Stromboli and the coachman. Honest John and Gideon, animals. And I've just written a question mark. There's no... They're the only ones who are. No one seems to question it.
I really like Honest John and Gideon. I think they're probably the highlight of the film for me. They're very typical of the animated shorts of the time, so it's nice to see something like that in one of the feature films.
Yeah.
But I don't think we get anything like that anymore, and I like just these sort of slapstick, dodgy cartoon characters interacting with our protagonist.
It would be remiss of me not to mention that Gideon is quote-unquote voiced by Mel Blanc, who was famously the voice of Bugs Bunny. Gideon only has a hiccup. That's his only noise. But it was Mel Blanc who did it. I believe he originally recorded some dialogue for it when the character had it, or he was going to record it, and then it fell apart. But yeah, that is technically Mel Blanc, and the only time the voice of Bugs Bunny appears in a Disney film, because obviously the Looney Tunes and Disney were sort of cartoon rivals. So yeah, just a weird little bit of trivia.
I'm wondering if that is just Disney throwing shade to Mel Blanc, telling him he was going to be in a film and then cutting out all the dialogue except for a hiccup.
I was thinking this with how much they crap upon actors.
I noticed this. Disney really doesn't like actors, and I want to know what the story there is.
The bit where Jiminy says, well, he's an actor, I guess he doesn't need a conscience. And the fact that an actor in a sound studio had to sit and read that, and I just picture Disney behind a soundproof screen just staring at him like, yeah, you know what I'm saying, scum. So just going back a little bit on the plot, so Jiminy is going to teach Pinocchio how to be a good person. He's rubbish at teaching people how to whistle. If someone says to you, I can't whistle, and you go, well, I'm just going to whistle, do what I'm doing, that's not good teaching.
See, it would have been easier if he was rubbing his legs together and just asked Pinocchio, like, if you ever need me, just rub your legs together.
I mean, it's as good as anything. Also, I don't think at any point Pinocchio does whistle and Jiminy shows up. I think the one time he does, Jiminy doesn't. So, good work, Jiminy.
Yeah, because this isn't a magical little green man. This is just a little green man who thinks he's always going to be within earshot.
I also made a note about Jiminy that he needs to stop hitting on inanimate women. It happens quite a lot. So early on, he leans on the butt of a woman.
I've got a note about this, in that despite the fact that this is an incredibly pious film, there is a lot of bum-related humour in this film, like throughout.
The first thing Jiminy does when he gets to the fire is warm his bum on it.
Yes.
And then he's immediately resting his hand, by accident, on a female model. By which I mean a model of a female. And there's also something creepy about him perving on the French lady puppets. I don't know, I just think that's weird. He's a cricket or a little green man and they're puppets.
Talking of the puppets, we get to the puppet show because Pinocchio has been convinced by Honest John and Gideon that he should become an actor, and this is in Stromboli's puppet show, which leads to, I think, one of the best sequences in early Disney, which is I've Got No Strings, which is an excellent song accompanied by a really weird and surreal puppet show with lots of puppets of different nationalities, and Pinocchio, the puppet without strings, is interacting with them all. And the audience just eats it up. They're not terrified, as I would be.
I'm pretty terrified of normal puppet shows, to be honest.
They're just sitting in the audience going, well, a demon puppet was the obvious next step.
I put it to you that all the puppets are real because, well, they're all real puppets, but they're all conscious because, A, when Pinocchio is given life by the Blue Fairy, he says, I can walk, I can talk, not, oh my god, I'm alive, I've gained consciousness, what is this world? Which implies he was conscious and aware before, he was just trapped in a wooden body. But 2, Stromboli seems to be operating a one-man show, which is fair enough. But you only ever see him conducting music, so who's operating the puppets?
He's a really good ventriloquist.
No, but who's operating the strings? You can't.
Oh, that's a very good point, actually.
Ventriloquists can't operate strings. Maybe he's that good.
He has a very complicated series of paddles at his feet.
But yeah, I agree, this song is good. I think generally the songs in this are pretty memorable. I think Hi Diddly Dee is often stuck in my head compared to the Snow White songs, which...
I've already forgotten about.
Yeah, exactly. In my head, there's only one song in that film, and I know there's not, so... My notes about Stromboli are, he makes me feel uncomfortable about various racial depictions. Number 2 is that he eats an onion like an apple, which I find uncomfortable. And number 3, he can't pronounce the word Constantinople.
Regarding point number 1, I'm almost certain that Walt Disney had a problem with Romani gypsies. And what's interesting is, if you're watching this on Disney+, a lot of films on Disney Plus at the moment will come with a disclaimer saying this reflects cultural opinions of the time and has been presented in its original form, but just please be aware of this. Pinocchio is one of the only early Disney films that doesn't come with this disclaimer, which is making me think that the Walt Disney Company is being like, yeah, this is fine.
It's either that or they say, it wasn't even the views of the time, it was racist then, but we did it anyway. To be fair, I think it could be a lot worse, but it's definitely enough in that direction to make you uncomfortable. The sequence in the back of Stromboli's cart is where the real horror of this film starts to settle in.
Yes, the original story, and particularly this adaptation, are definitely a morality tale. So obviously we need Pinocchio going off to be an actor to have some sort of repercussion. But the repercussion is terrifying.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever worked in the world of theatre, but it is commonplace for when actors get too old for them to be chopped up. So the blue fairy comes down and rescues Pinocchio and says, I can't do this again. And I was thinking, okay, so when Geppetto's swallowed by a whale later on, she's like, hey, not my problem. I mean, it's literally my fault this has happened to Geppetto and he's not done anything to deserve it, but Pinocchio had his one chance. Stromboli also has the theme in this film that nothing bad happens to bad people. So he just makes a load of money and rides off. Now you could argue that, his star attraction has run off, but he's not lost anything. He's still got his entire business, and he made a load of money from that one night. So worst case scenario, he's back where he started, but with 300 gold in his back pocket. For a morality tale, it really skims over that, and that's something you don't get in these early Disney films, as the comeuppance to the villains. I know the evil queen is struck by lightning and killed. Yeah, fine, I guess that's a bad thing. But Stromboli just rides into the sunset, ready to kidnap another child.
You make a really good point about the nature of this as a morality tale, because if you look at it from anyone else's perspective other than Pinocchio, it's not a morality tale. Terrible things happen to good people, and bad people just get away with it.
Which I guess leads us on to the next part of the film, which is the coachman, who is just a creepy man in a pub. I wrote down, the coachman is literally just trafficking children. That's what he's doing. There's no way of sugarcoating it.
How much money is there in donkeys that you can afford to run Pleasure Island and make a profit?
I wrote exactly the same thing. The profit margin on Pleasure Island seems low. One of the attractions is smashing up this big, beautiful country house. He's giving away booze and cigarettes and tobacco. The donkeys must be worth so much in this universe. I do like to think that Pleasure Island was Disney's first go at Disneyland.
Do you think Pleasure Island inspired Walt Disney to go, I should make this then?
Yeah, I think that's probably what he went with. And then after a while he was like, I might cut out the bit about selling them into mine slavery. I'll just make money off the entertainment. I guess I can do without the slavery bit at the end.
And his accountant coming to him saying, Walt, you can't be giving children cigarettes and booze. It's too expensive.
There is one part of Pleasure Island which is a tent you go into fight, and I was like, that's basically just Fight Club. So all the boys disappear, apart from Pinocchio and his new best friend, whose name I can never remember. I've just watched the film an hour ago and I can't remember his name.
Pinocchio's friend is Lampwick, and Lampwick might be one of my favourite characters in Disney.
Really?
I just think he's a really interesting take on a naughty kid. Like, he's got a lot of swagger about him, which is a lot of fun. And the transformation scene is excellent, and the voice actor performing him seems genuinely terrified. They've conveyed it really well.
Because Walt was showing him the actual plans for what happens to child actors. He showed him the axe.
Talking about the transformation scene, when this is inevitably remade as a live-action film, I want that transformation scene to be an equivalent to An American Werewolf in London.
Oh, that'd be so good. I mean, I genuinely think they couldn't really make anything more horrifying. I argue it's the most disturbing thing Disney has ever put to screen. It's horrendous.
Other than Gurgi.
Other than Gurgi. We'll get to Gurgi.
I've got a question for you. Would Pinocchio turn into a wooden donkey?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, at no point do we establish exactly how the donkey transformation works. Is it an intrinsic property of boozing, etc. in this universe? Is that why Honest John is a fox because he's lived a dodgy life? Or is it an intrinsic property to Pleasure Island but only for boys? I also like, by the way, that only boys, because girls are just like, nah, mate.
I think it is an intrinsic property because the coachman does say if you give a boy enough rope, he'll make an ass of himself.
I'm sorry, I just had a horrible flashback to the scene where he's asking donkeys what their name is and they just eeyore, and then he throws them in a cave and they go down to the salt mine, and that's the end. And the coachman's never caught. Honest John briefly references the police and the coachman's like, nah, they're not going to catch me. I'm just going to sit in a pub talking loudly about how I kidnap children. And everyone's fine with it. It's horrible.
Is the coachman the most villainous character created by Disney?
I mean, Frollo is trying to commit genocide, which is pretty bad. And also, weirdly, fits into our theory about Disney not liking Romanis.
Are you saying it would be better if Frollo was instead trying to turn the gypsies into donkeys?
I don't know if it's better to be dead or a human trapped in the body of a donkey trapped in a salt mine. That's for the courts to decide.
So ultimately, Pinocchio realises the horrors of Pleasure Island. He's the only character in this who faces any repercussions for his actions. That's not true. All of the boys are turned into donkeys and left in salt mines.
Except the ones who remember their names. We don't know what happens to them, but it's implied it's even worse somehow.
I like the little outfits they wear as donkeys. I think it's quite cute.
I mean, cute is not the word I'd use to describe that scene. So, he escapes Pleasure Island, he gets home, he finds out that his dad's been swallowed by a whale. Hey, happens to us all.
Regarding Geppetto, remember how the puppet show was a massive success?
Yes.
Wouldn't have Geppetto have heard about this and gone, I need to find Stromboli, he has my boy? Or was he just assuming the show involved a different puppet boy that was brought to life?
I like to think it's just because Geppetto's so nice he doesn't go to the rough part of town.
Even when his son has been kidnapped.
Well, he's going to be like, I don't have time to go to the puppet show. I've got to find my lost son. And also spend a long time making a really nice dinner for my fish and cat.
That he doesn't let them eat until he's found Pinocchio. In which case, make the dinner when you get back. Also, you should not feed cake to a fish.
I mean, I can't argue with that.
I like that the animators were thinking, what is a good meal for this cat and fish? And they thought, well, a cat, it would be a really nice bit of fish that's been roasted with all the accompaniments. And then they were like, well, what does a fish eat?
Cake on a rope. Classic fish meal there, cake on a rope. So Jiminy reads that Geppetto's been swallowed by Monstro, who apparently has a reputation for swallowing boats. And I was like, okay, presumably Monstro's a name that's been given to him by the fishermen, etc. It's established they live near a port. But then the fish know he's called Monstro as well. So is Monstro his official name? Like, does he go, I'm Monstro? How does it work?
So the Blue Fairy sends a letter to tell Pinocchio that he's been swallowed by Monstro. She's willing to send a letter, but she's not willing to intervene any further. That's fine, I suppose.
Too much effort.
So Pinocchio decides to track down Monstro. Conveniently, he has a donkey tail, which he ties a rock to, which I think is an incredibly charming little sequence where he ties a rock to his tail to sink to the bottom of the ocean.
I absolutely love that. There's something so surreal and weird and beautiful about it, particularly when he says goodbye to Jiminy. He's like, yep, I'm going to the bottom of the ocean now. Ta-ra.
So Pinocchio has journeyed to the bottom of the ocean, which luckily he is wood, so he can breathe underwater. Apparently Jiminy seems to have no problem with it, actually. And we cut to inside of Monstro, where we see that Geppetto has been swallowed whole with his ship, his cat, and his fish, and they are starving.
There's a line here that says, I never thought it would end this way, starving to death inside the belly of a whale. And I thought, yeah, that's fair.
I would have been more worried if that's exactly what he expected.
Well, this is exactly how I planned to die.
There's also a very good line shortly after where he says, my poor Pinocchio, he was such a good boy. And I'm thinking, how do you know? You spent one evening with him and then just sent him off into the world.
If anything, if I was Geppetto, I'd be worried, because the first night he spends with Pinocchio, Pinocchio sets himself on fire and is delighted. Then as soon as he sees Pinocchio again, Pinocchio's like, hey, let's start a big fire.
Yeah, so in order to escape from Monstro, once Pinocchio joins them, he decides to set a fire in order to make him sneeze. And my worry was, I don't think that would make him sneeze. I think that would just kill Monstro.
I don't think Monstro can be killed. And this brings me into my fan theory that I mentioned in the last episode. So, in one of the shorts among the package movies, which we'll probably talk about at some point, there is a short called The Whale That Wanted to Sing at the Met. And it's about an opera singing whale that's amazing, but some whalers go and kill it for no adequately explained reason. My fan theory is that Monstro is related to that whale, whether they're partners or siblings or whatever. And that's why Monstro has such an irrational hatred of all life. But I don't think Monstro can be killed because Monstro sleeps on the bottom of the ocean. Now, whales are mammals. They can't breathe underwater. But Monstro is so dedicated to killing and exterminating all life, he's somehow found a way to do it.
What actually happens to Monstro in the end of the film? I can't remember. I know they escape, and I know they end up washed up on the beach. Does Monstro just give up?
I couldn't remember this either, even though I've seen this film a bunch of times. He hits his head on a rock. I told you nothing bad happens to bad creatures in this film. He's still out there. Monstro, by the way, is the source of my phobia, which is I don't like being over a body of water with the fear that there's something underneath me. Now, I thought this was linked to giant squids or something like that, but watching this back, I was like, no, it's definitely from this sequence.
That's interesting. I'm actually the opposite.
You're scared of whales above you.
No, I love the open ocean, and in fact, whales are my favourite type of animal, particularly sperm whales, which I'm not sure what type of whale Monstro is supposed to be. He seems to have elements of both a sperm whale and a blue whale.
And he's got human teeth.
That's the sperm whale part of him. Sperm whales naturally have teeth.
No, but they're not like pointed teeth like fangs, are they? I thought they had like the filter teeth.
So, at the risk of getting off topic, whales are generally split into two categories. You've got toothed whales and baleen whales. A blue whale, which is what you'd think Monstro is, would be a baleen whale, which is the ones that have the filter teeth. And a toothed whale, like a sperm whale, has the teeth exactly like Monstro. This is all going.
No, it's going in. I also think, just on a side note, I think this sequence is absolutely stunning. Again, given this was almost entirely hand-drawn, the water effects, the movement of it, the motion of the water when characters are being pulled and pushed by currents and the flow of the water, it's absolutely astonishing and horrifying, which, if I could give a 3-word summary of Pinocchio, those would be it. Astonishing and horrifying.
So we get to the end of the film. Pinocchio and Geppetto have escaped from Monstro, and in doing so, Pinocchio seems to have died. And I'm not sure what this means.
Because he was never alive, right? He was never a boy.
What happened that Geppetto went, this hunk of wood is now dead? Did it stop breathing? Was he breathing?
Well, he lets out bubbles earlier and he can smoke, so presumably he can breathe.
Did he have a heartbeat? I'm not sure what vital signs he's missing to give Geppetto this information, but he is now mourning his dead wooden son.
So let's just recap what we've seen in this film. Pinocchio gets kidnapped twice. He is a child. He's technically a day old. All the other children we see a very small amount go to school, admittedly in the background. All the other children get turned into donkeys and sold off. Pinocchio gets partly turned into a donkey, then killed.
And I reiterate, this is entirely the Blue Fairy's fault. She gave him life and all of his characteristics that led to the decisions he has made. The only thing she did out of her control was putting this little green man in charge of his conscience.
So just to be clear, the Blue Fairy makes it so Pinocchio can't drown because he sends himself to the bottom of the ocean, but then seems to give the caveat that he can drown when she wants him to? She's just a sadist.
This whole film is just the Blue Fairy torturing Geppetto.
Exactly, like, couldn't she just say, I'm just going to turn him into a boy, or, oh no, he's not really dead, look, he's a real boy. No, I'll let Geppetto take his son's corpse back to his toy shop and start mourning. Maybe Disney just likes the film's ending with the protagonist dead.
The arbitrary conditions that she set out that Pinocchio had to meet, he met by setting a fire inside Monstro, is that correct?
Well, it's that he was brave, I think, was one of them, but I think at the point at which he sends himself to the bottom of the ocean and says goodbye to Jiminy, he's brave, right? Couldn't she just go, look, before you fight Monstro, I'm just going to sort all this out? But she's like, oh, let's see how this plays out.
So you're suggesting she should have turned him into a real boy at the bottom of the ocean?
Yes. My final note that I've written is Pinocchio looks way creepier as a boy than as a puppet.
Yeah, a big part of it, I think, is the nose. As soon as he turns into a real boy and has a real nose, he just looks completely terrifying. Actually, did we mention the nose at any point?
No, but I don't think the film's really famous for that, is it? So don't need to mention Pinocchio's nose growing. We probably should talk about the nose. So every time he lies, it gets bigger and kind of more wooden.
Yeah, it reaches a point where he just has a full tree branch growing out of his nose, complete with a nest full of birds. It would appear that Pinocchio has the ability to create life via lying.
Which is weird and scary, which is apt for the film. But does this continue to apply once Pinocchio turns into a real boy at the end? Like, if when he's 20 and he starts lying, will birds just fly out of his face? Or, because he's now flesh, will, like, it grow into something fleshy, like it turns into a bear or something? I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe.
An extra limb growing out of his face.
And he's like, don't ask about the nose. It's a hand now. I'd like to tell you why, but if I tell you that, it's probably going to get worse.
So yes, we reach the point where the Blue Fairy has decided that Geppetto has suffered enough for her cruel games, and she turns Pinocchio into a real boy, and and that's the ending of the film. And I have to admit, it is one of my favourites, particularly among the earlier films.
I think it really sets up a lot of tropes. We've got the wishing upon a star, we've got the element of magic, which isn't really in the first film, particularly. I think it's quite a weird film in terms of tone. It's certainly the darkest, or one of the darkest films, but also in terms of structure, it's quite weird. It doesn't really fit into the other fairy tale structures of, here's a character who wants something and they have to go on a journey together. It's a lot of weird scenes mashed together.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is probably one of the only examples of Disney doing a kind of Odyssey sort of storytelling rather than a specific challenge to overcome. It's just Pinocchio going on a journey and changing because of that journey.
You're right. The only other ones I can really think of off the top of my head are The Jungle Book and The Princess and the Frog, but I think they're a little bit more focused and certainly a lot less surreal. And I think it also stands out in terms of Disney not quite getting into its groove in terms of universes. The majority of Disney films are either humans with an element of magic, which I think Snow White definitely falls into, or the animal world, but there's a twist on it, which kind of is Dumbo, but definitely is Bambi. Pinocchio doesn't really fall into either of those categories and stands out by itself.
Is that entirely just because of Honest John and Gideon? Are you saying that Honest John and Gideon ruin the continuity of the Disney films?
They've got a lot to answer for, is all I'm saying. The only other one that stands out is Robin Hood, because they're people and they're animals, and maybe it's a fox thing, because Honest John's a fox as well. Basically, I'm saying I find anthropomorphic foxes weird and they don't fit into my worldview.
Talking of anthropomorphic foxes, we get to my favourite part of the podcast, which is discussing which is the sexiest character in Pinocchio. So, Ben, who is the sexiest character in Pinocchio, and why is it the fish?
I strongly suspected going into this that we were going to agree on it being the fish. There's quite a few fish in this film, just to be clear. We're talking about Cleo the goldfish. I want to be clear, I don't find fish sexy.
Walt Disney does for some reason.
Yeah, this fish is needlessly over-sexualized. Like, you could say, it's because she's a female character and it's traditional for them to have the big lips and eyes, but she's very coy, she wants a kiss from the cat. I don't get it.
There is just no competition for this one. I almost considered one of the French marionettes, but I was just like, they're not even close.
And the creepy thing about the French marionettes is there's a large bearded Stromboli behind them, whereas the fish at least has its own agency. And on that note, that horrifying note, we've gone through Pinocchio. Liam, in your humble opinion, is Pinocchio worthy of being the first film that makes the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics?
We've got the parchment here, our large ornate quill ready, and I'm going to say yes. I'm happy for this to be the first one on the list.
I would also second that. I don't think it's a perfect film by any stretch, but I definitely think it's got a huge amount of merit to it. And for me, the sign of a good piece of art is one that generates an emotional reaction, and Pinocchio definitely does that.
And on that note, we will write in large, beautiful letters, Pinocchio at the top of our list. Large enough that you might look at that and go, hang on a minute, guys, aren't you going to need room for more? To which we'll say, oh boy, are you in for a surprise?
Every film that doesn't make it, just remember, we think it's worse than Pinocchio. What are we looking at next time, Liam?
Next up is going to be Fantasia.
Well, I'm interested to rewatch this one because, again, this is one I watched a lot as a kid, and as an adult, I found it just quite a weird experience. But we shall see. I don't know how we're going to fall on the sexy characters in that because a lot of it's very abstract, but hey, we'll work it out. Liam, thanks again for joining me. Thank you so much for listening to us revisiting Pinocchio. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone, and remember to join us next time for Fantasia.
Makes no difference who you are.